No one's really positive, but it looks like the first person to notice the new life forms was an amateur botanist in Wisconsin. They thought they'd made a major find, a new type of fungal growth. They got samples, they took pictures in its natural environment. They did an excellent job of documenting what they found, where they found it, and all the conditions under which it was discovered. Other people began to go out there and look for the same thing. And other people started to find it all over the place. Not just in Wisconsin, but in state after state after state. And this was new. And there pretty much was no way it could have gone without being noticed until now. So it wasn't just new in the sense of a new discovery. It was really new. First, it just piqued interest. Then a lot of scientists began to become concerned. And then a lot of people in the public began to grumble. The conspiracy theorists, of course, were the first. But before they could actually come up with a cogent theory to explain this, whether it was based in reality or not, it was found in other countries. In very short order, all of the Americas. And then people began to notice it was in Asia and Europe. And the last place it seems to have gotten to was the British Isles. But it was there too. And the only place on the planet that seems to be completely free from it was the Antarctica. But spring was headed our way, and they weren't sure what was going to happen when what passes for warmer weather hit the South Pole. Seven months after that first announcement, the first bird was found. At first, people thought that the bird had some kind of strange fungal infection. But upon closer inspection, they discovered that some of the feathers had been replaced with ferns that played the same role. And they sat there in their labs and they watched the bird slowly begin to be converted into a fusion of both plant and animal. And then there was another found. And then a squirrel. And then a fox. And then it began to hit livestock. Some of the farmers panicked and just shot their livestock and burned the bodies as soon as they found that they began to be converted. But it was too late by then. What became known as the green spread far and fast, and humanity never got back on its feet, never really understood what was going on until it was just too damn late. "19 months after that first discovery in Wisconsin, the first human began to show signs. And within 3 months, they had been converted into something that was part plant and part human. The most noticeable effect was an overriding sense of calm. The person wasn't panicked, they weren't depressed, they weren't anxious. They still had their thoughts and their memories, but they seemed very content. And there was this unnerving sense that they were just waiting for something. Of course, there was more than just one. There was no way that any of us could survive on the food stores that we had left, so we had to eat what we could. And we took in the spores, and we began to be converted. Three years after the first discovery, the first person began to realize that they couldn't use electronic devices anymore that required a touch. Only things that had switches and dials and buttons. No more touchscreens. No more capacitive anything. Technology began to adapt. But then also someone realized that if the human tried really hard, they could make some of their parts do things they didn't do before. People began to play with it, growing flowers and barks, thorns and claws, becoming as feral as they wanted to, each one a little less human in appearance. The next leap was they began to realize they could manipulate other fused creatures and other uplifted plants that were now far more adaptable than they used to be. Before you knew it, there were people that were creating entire structures and machines that were purely biological. I mean, it was called biotechnology, but that word just pales into what they were doing. There were people still left in the world that hadn't been converted. And it was discovered that some people couldn't be. And they began to band together. Began to set up fortified cities to protect themselves from the green. They learned how to kill and cook and sterilize their food so they could get the nutrients they needed without running the risk of potential infection. The rest of us began to explore the world in a whole new way. With things that rode across the ground, swam in the ocean, beneath the waves. Before we knew it, we had things that would soar through the air themselves. Gliders mostly, but eventually blimps. Great plant-animal fusions that floated on the winds. A decade after that first discovery, and the lines were hard and fast. The fortified cities, the megacities as they came to be known, relied on technology and tried the best they could to preserve what was left from the past. The rest of us, we found new ways. And on the 11-year mark, someone figured out how to create something that could produce lift. Not just a little bit of lift, but a lot of lift. And they grew with one of the great blimps, which went into orbit and became one of the first world ships. Short trips to the satellites, to the moon, and eventually Mars. And we began to build great arcs, biotech machines that housed us and kept us safe. And we learned how to produce the light and the power we needed, because now we too needed sunlight to survive. I'm sure I'd find it a little disconcerting, seeing as I always been one that prefers the dark. But to be a living tool would be worth that trade-off. And humanity became two different species. One that left the world behind for the most part. Humans that stayed here, that had become part of the green, took care of the world. Reset the damage we had done with our industries. They made sure the fortified cities got what they needed. They took care of them. They came to think of those cities like preserves, maybe even zoos. And they stopped thinking of those people as the next step of humanity. They were no more human to us now than Neanderthals were, or Homo habilis. We'd moved past that. We'd moved beyond. We knew that there was an entire plethora of worlds out there. And we would get there with solar sails and fusion drives, because we began to work on those as well. Because we began to realize if nature could make it, we could figure out a way to copy it. We had an understanding of the universe that the older humans didn't. Some say they could even hear the song. The actual song of the universe itself. And they became our leaders. Part political, part religious. They were the ones that led us forward to explore, to find new things, to be new things, to find out what we could do and where we could go. And many of us said goodbye to those that we left behind. And the green spread itself as it had spread itself to Earth, as a dusting from the sky, to be found by some amateur thinking they'd made a brand new discovery and not knowing how profoundly right they were.